Hello everybody, welcome back to another video where I talk over a game, and today I wanted to talk about, I'm guessing therapy would be the topic, but also the fact that people tend to say, if you ever need to talk, ... meaning that if you wanted to, I guess, discuss something that's on your mind, that you can come to them, etc, etc. And how that's almost the same as people saying, how are you? And they don't really want to know the answer to that. Like, for instance, last November, my brother was discovered deceased in his home, and of course we've had all the funeral stuff and all that stuff, and some of my coworkers were actually at the funeral, and they, among other people that were there, also said something along the lines like, oh, I'm always there if you want to talk, and stuff like that. And then in a moment that feels like support, but then some time passes, and all I'm really doing is just talking about matters that I'm dealing with, like factually, in regards to his passing, and very quickly we run into a bit of a wall, and I'm not really sure why that is. Like, they don't know how to handle it or something. Like, for instance, usually on Monday we'll have the, oh, what did you do on the weekend talk, which is also kind of stressful, by the way, because it feels like you have to do something on the weekend or to have something to say on Monday, but that's a different topic. Anyway, so a couple of weekends I would go to my brother's apartment on Saturdays and then do some cleaning or do some fixing, painting over some spots on the wall, stuff like that. So then the Monday that followed, I would say that that's what I have been doing, and I would get this almost like a pained look from the person that I was talking to, the coworker that I was talking to, that really said like, yeah, I don't know if I really want to hear this, but also I don't really want to cut them off, but I'm just gonna sit here and wait for the right moment to cut in, like that, like they were just like, And I see that and I think, well, I'm not really saying anything crazy. Am I just saying how I repainted a piece of the ceiling because there had been a leak there apparently at some point, not leaking anymore, but you get like that brown residue in the ceiling, and so I just kind of painted over that so that the ceiling is all white again and stuff like that. But apparently just the fact that I was at the apartment makes them go, ew, I don't really want to hear this, or I don't really want to talk about it or something, which kind of confuses me. And other times, like recently, I've gotten more issues with my mother, who was already kind of like mentally declining. That hasn't gotten any better or anything like that, but her relationship is also declining, and she's been sending me all kinds of weird messages about how she wants me to do stuff for her, and I'm like, I need to call on some professional care workers to go and check out the situation over there, because I can't go there every day because it's like an hour and a half down the road, blah blah. I have my job, I have my life, it's stuff that I have to do, so I definitely cannot do that. Anyway, so I was talking about how she had been sending me these messages, and that same pained look came up. But instead of just sitting there and listening to my story, they started to like interject with other things that they had experienced with their mother-in-law or something like that. That was kind of maybe in the same vein. And instead of just like trying to circle back towards my story as an, oh, I'm just wanting to like exchange a bit of a story with you, but I know this is your story, so I'm going to go back to your mother. They just kind of ended it there. And it almost sounded kind of like, oh yeah, I've had something like that. Okay, so coffee? Like almost like that. Not at that speed, but it kind of came down to that. So then I'm thinking, like, why did you say that we could always talk? And then I try to talk, which is already something that's difficult to do in the first place. And then I basically get cut off. Or I get these odd glances, like I said, like a bit of weird pity and also kind of annoyance glance, like, oh no, they're talking about this again, what do I do? They don't really want to hear about that type of thing. Maybe they find it a very touchy subject and they don't actually want to talk about it, but I also don't feel like pretending that I didn't go to the apartment to clean something or try to fix something. Like, am I supposed to pretend that everything's great and just been like partying on the weekend and hanging out with lots of other people, just doing fun stuff that didn't really have any type of emotional undertone or anything like that? Is that what I'm supposed to be doing on some Monday mornings? Or because if not, I'm not really sure what they mean by talk, like if you ever need to talk. But I'm thinking that means if you ever need to talk about this subject, like we're currently at a funeral. I'm not asking if you ever want to talk about gardening, like, you know what I mean by if you ever need to talk. That's what I would think the subject of the talk would be, something along those lines. And then I don't actually feel like I'm allowed to talk about that later. I'm not really sure why. Like, why would you offer that if that wasn't really on the menu, so to speak? Basically, it may sound like a nice thing to do in the moment, but if you're not really prepared to talk about something like that or listen to something like that, don't offer it. But okay, it's one of those niceties that people tend to do because they think it makes the person in the moment feel better, and then we move on. Like, that's the idea. But I was also kind of thinking about therapy, because therapy often also relies on a similar thing, but it's slightly different. A lot of therapies, they want you to talk about your feelings and stuff like that. And if you're on the spectrum, you have like alexithymia, which is that you're not really sure what you're feeling anyway. That's not super helpful. And then the other thing that therapists like to do is offer something like cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT as they call that, or something like that. ACT is another one, I think. Most of those are directed at unhelpful behaviors that people have that they keep running into. And then the therapist helps identify what's going on, like what are you thinking, what are you feeling in those situations, where does the behavior come from, and then you go into how that behavior is not helpful, like what makes more sense, like what are the actual facts, what would be a better thing to do in that moment, and then they go ahead and test that in practice, and then eventually figure out, oh, actually this behavior is much more helpful, and then they've been helped. Basically, that's what the therapy is for. But people on the spectrum tend to be very CBT on their own. And like I said, alexithymia, or just not being able to know exactly what it is that you're feeling anyway, like really having to sit and think about that. Or, well, that's probably not a good thing to do than think if you're trying to feel. But anyway, so it's not clear what is being felt. And so that question is always very confusing and not really sure. And I've had a therapist who also kind of wanted to know that type of thing. And I tend to just go into, well, when this happens, I do that, and etc., and then that happens, and blah, blah, blah. And there's not really much feeling there because I'm very much practically minded, like, oh, this happens, I'm going to do that. And CBT is more for getting people out of their feelings and into their mind to try and logically figure out what's going on factually, this and that's happening. Like, say that there was somebody who went to a therapist because every time the phone rings, they get anxiety and stuff like that, and they want that to go away because it wasn't always like that, blah, blah, blah. And then the therapist might talk to them for a while, and then they figure out together that actually it started when they had debt for some time, and every phone call, or that's like how they felt, every phone call was a debt collector trying to figure out when they're going to pay, blah, blah, blah. And then they figure out, like, what's the situation today? Is there any more debt? No. Are there actual debt collectors calling right now? And really, it's very unlikely any case. And even back then, was every phone call a debt collector? No. Some of them were from my family, and I was sad about the fact that they went to voicemail because I just let the phone ring, blah, blah, blah. They would eventually go, okay, the behavior right now is you get stressed because you think that this and that may happen. This and that type of person is going to be on the other side of the phone. Does it make sense to think that? No, it's unlikely that we're going to get another debt collector on the line. So what would be a helpful replacement for that? Okay, when the phone rings, maybe I could just be curious about who's calling me or whatever it was, like some type of different behavior to put on top of the anxiety behavior. And then they can try that out and then go ahead and figure out that that's actually a much better way to deal with their phone. But speaking of phones, somebody on the spectrum may already have an issue with phones in general. This is not something that just started one day, so they may have an issue with phones and go to a therapist and hope to work on that. And the therapist is going to start digging about, like, what do you feel, like, what's going on, how did this happen? And you're not really going to have a good answer for them. And they may also suggest that you will be curious about who may be on the other end of the phone when it rings next time. But there will probably be more to it than, oh, let's just pretend to be curious about who's on the other end. There is the pathological demand avoidance. There is the fact that we need time to think about things before we can actually answer in a way that is satisfactory to us or something. Like whenever somebody calls me or I have to call somebody, I'm stressed because they could ask me something that I did not prepare for, and will I then be able to give them an answer, or will I stutter, or will I just not be able to say anything useful? Will I sound stupid, etc., etc.? That's not something that a simple CBT exercise is going to tackle, because there's more going on in the background than simply A happens and then the response is B, therefore let's try C or something. It doesn't really work like that. Anyway, so that therapy did not do very much for me. Also, what I noticed, that's more of a me thing, I think, but after a while of like doing the usual introductions and stuff, like in the earlier sessions, the therapist wants me to dig into stuff in the past to see what's going on, etc., etc. And it seemed with each session, like each progressing talk that we had, they would of course learn more and more about my past and stuff like that. And after a while, they would start giving me these reactions like they were shocked about something. They started putting two and two together, and they started going like, oh my god, this is what's been happening to you, and stuff like that, and that must have been terrible, that must have been this, that must have been that, and blah blah blah. And I found myself like going, oh no, this is not what I want. They're like apparently not able to handle this. They seem to be very stressed and bordering on hysterical, and that's also something that I got from my mother, that she would go hysterical whenever something happened that she was not prepared for. So that makes me go, I'm going to manage your response. So if I notice that people are getting upset or worried, concerned, anything that raises their voice or makes their eyes go a little wider, anything like that, I cut it off. And then I go, oh, but it's okay because I do this and it's fine, etc., etc. If they suggested some type of exercise for me to try during the week, I'll come back next time and say that it worked great. And then we'll eventually go to a part of the therapy where the therapist thinks that they've helped me, and then it's time for us to part ways like that. So effectively, I'm managing the therapist into thinking that they've done a good job, which is not helpful for me either, but it's just like something that I do because I just don't like the fact that people get stressed or something. So I'm already kind of monitoring what people do when I'm talking about something that's sensitive. So that in particular made me go, well, why do you say that you want to be able to like have these conversations with me, and then I actually say something that's still kind of on the surface, and I'm already getting these vibes from you that you're not able to handle it. And then I'm like, okay, I'll just take everything back inside, and we're not going to play out here today. Kind of like that meme with the person in the box, like, oh, I've been in this box for so long, let's see what's out there. And then they like get punched back in, except that I'm the one who's like closing the thing before anything can happen outside. It kind of feels like I have to protect other people from my problems somehow, which is kind of weird because you would like, there's tons of people out there who say that you should like share what's going on with you, and because that helps or whatever, you're not alone and blah blah blah. You hear all these messages all over the place, and I'm like, yeah, well, wait until I actually start talking about what's going on, because we won't be hearing those messages for much longer. At least they'll start to regret asking in the first place, I'm pretty sure. In any case, those are my thoughts on people offering to be available to talk if and whenever, and also how therapy does not quite work for people on the spectrum, and definitely not for me in particular. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think about these subjects. Put it in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you guys. I don't get enough comments, so make sure to leave a comment or a like. Both of those are fine. Hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye for now.